Number 10. Gave Mary Jane cancer with his web fluid. In the alternate future featured in Spider-Man Reign, Peter Parker is a lonely old man who has given up superheroics after the death of his wife, Mary Jane. So, how did MJ die? Was it the Green Goblin? Dr. Octopus? No, it was Spidey himself. You see, it turned out that Spider-Man's radioactive blood also caused his other bodily fluids to become radioactive. So, when he and his wife would be together and Spider-Man's web shooter would go off, he was inadvertently exposing MJ to dangerous levels of radiation. And rather than giving her superpowers, it gave her cancer, leading to her unfortunate end. Now, this is way worse than a lot of the other stuff on this list, but the fact that there's no way that Peter could have seen that coming, and it was clearly an accident, puts it at the bottom of this list. The accident criteria is also why the death of Gwen Stacy will not be mentioned on this list. Number 9. Tricks J. Jonah Jameson into thinking his son is Spider-Man. When an anonymous donor gave J. Jonah Jameson $5 million to fund a contest offering a cash reward for proof of the identity of Spider-Man, the whole city turned against the webbed wall crawler. Suddenly, every other holdup he stopped turned out to be a trap. Entire SWAT teams were piling on him trying to get his mask off to get that cash. In order to bring this contest to a close, in Marvel Knights Spider-Man number 8, Spidey broke into John Jameson's apartment and staged a series of photos, making it look like JJ's son was the real Spider-Man. He claimed that they had had a deal going back years and that Jameson's vendetta had been against his own son the whole time. Jameson believed the ruse and cancelled the contest, giving Peter a portion of the prize money, despite not intending to release the pictures. So, in order to end his own troubles, Peter defrauded his boss and tricked him into thinking his son was keeping secrets from him. This could have done irreparable harm to Jonah and his son's relationship, but as long as Spider-Man's life is a bit easier. Number 8. Having an affair with Betty Brant. In another incident of Peter messing with the lives of his co-workers, we have the events of Amazing Spider-Man number 190. When Betty Brant and her husband Ned Leeds were having marital problems, Betty had a brief affair with Peter Parker, who was recovering from Mary Jane turning down his marriage proposal. Although it isn't explicit how far Peter went with the married wife of one of his friends and co-workers, the passionate makeout session being followed up with a panel that reads "several hours later" is pretty suspicious. Number 7. Staging photos of a fake battle. In one of Spider-Man's earliest adventures in Amazing Spider-Man number 4, the webhead goes up against the Sandman for the first time. Although the villain causes Spider-Man some trouble, Peter is eventually able to defeat Sandman by trapping him with a large industrial-sized vacuum cleaner. Once the villain is taken care of, Spider-Man realizes that if he had remembered to take pictures of the fight, he could have sold them to the Daily Bugle for a sizable fee. He then thinks to himself, "Say, why not?" and stages the photos by grabbing a bucket of sand, throwing it in the air, and then taking pictures of himself pretending to fight the villain. His plan works and he scams Jameson out of a decent chunk of change for the fraudulent photos. Although JJ did make a point of deducting the cost of having the pictures developed out of the pay, so he didn't get as scammed as he could have. Number 6. Attacking Daredevil. While tracking down a villain called the Sin Eater, who had killed Spider-Man's friend on the police force, Jean DeWolf, Spider-Man teamed up with the Man Without Fear to try and bring Sin Eater to justice. When the villain went after Betty Brant in Spectacular Spider-Man number 110, Spider-Man's anger got the best of him and he began brutally beating the villain with seemingly lethal intent. Daredevil tried to stop his friend from making a horrible mistake, and Spidey showed his appreciation by throwing Daredevil out of a window. The two continued to fight, but Peter's blind rage and Daredevil's heightened senses led to the Man Without Fear coming out victorious. Peter was wearing the black symbiote suit at this time, so this might explain his heightened rage, but it doesn't excuse his actions. And Daredevil is my favorite Marvel hero, so throwing him out the window kinda rubs me the wrong way. Number 5. Robbing a jewelry store. In Amazing Spider-Man number 87, Spider-Man was dealing with some health issues which he believed were caused by his radioactive blood. These issues were causing bouts of delirium and difficulty using his powers. He was so worried about his health that he completely forgot about Gwen Stacy's birthday. In a moment of desperation, he breaks into a jewelry store, rips open a safe, and takes a pearl necklace from inside. He came to his senses before leaving with the pearls, but that does not undo all the property damage he did to the store and the safe. You may think, This is excusable due to his mystery illness, but when he sees a doctor later that issue, that mystery illness he was freaking out over turned out to be nothing more than the flu. Number 4, letting some guy get kidnapped. In Amazing Spider-Man number 112, appropriately titled Spidey Cops Out, Spider-Man is searching the city for his missing Aunt May. He decides to make this his first and only priority and ignores all other crimes he comes across to focus on finding May. This is excusable to a degree. Like, yeah, don't stop a robbery across town if you're looking for clues for a specific crime. But there comes a moment where Spidey witnesses a kidnapping and does nothing to stop it. The man is screaming out his window, begging for help, as another man with a gun drags him away. And where is Spider-Man? On the building directly across. The victim even shouts directly at the hero, saying, "Spider-Man, you see me! I know you see me!" Talk about awkward. Spider-Man ignores this brutal kidnapping, happening less than 50 feet away, and returns to his search, despite the fact that he could have ended this with like 2 webs. You'd think Peter would know better than to let armed criminals go, because he'd rather focus on his own problems. Speaking of which, number 3, not stopping the robber in Amazing Fantasy number 15. One of the worst things Peter Parker ever did was in his very first appearance. After being bit by the radioactive spider and gaining his spider powers, Peter realizes that he can make a lot of money as an entertainer. He tries his hand at wrestling, easily defeating his opponent, and is almost immediately approached by a television producer. Spider-Man becomes an instant smash, and Peter seems set for stardom until one night after a show, he finds himself between a thief and an elevator. Deciding that after years of being pushed around, he is going to, quote, "only look out for number 1, that means me," as if we didn't know what that meant, Peter lets the robber go, and that robber, of course, ends up killing Peter's Uncle Ben in a robbery gone wrong not long after. Spider-Man learns the lesson that with great power comes great responsibility and becomes the superhero we all know and love. Number 2, hitting Mary Jane. The Clone Saga makes me want to hit things too. But there's no excuse for this behavior. In Spectacular Spider-Man number 226, Peter and Ben Reilly are trying to figure out which of them is the clone and which of them is the original. The two go to Seward Trainor's lab and run some tests, which seem to show that Peter is the clone. In response to this news, Peter freaks out and accuses Ben of trying to steal his life. He starts choking Ben out with a pipe, at which point Mary Jane steps in to try and break up the fight. Peter gives Mary Jane a pretty brutal looking backhand before being overwhelmed with guilt and running away. What makes it even worse is that Mary Jane was pregnant at the time. You know, it says a lot about the Clone Saga that this isn't considered the worst part of that story. Number 1, the time he became a mobster's bodyguard. When the villain Digger began hunting down members of the New York mob, Don Farrelly decides that his best course of action is to hire Spider-Man to protect him. Being a superhero, Spider-Man of course refuses. Then the gangster offers him $10K a day, at which point Spidey signs up faster than you can say forget about it. One of the terms of his employment is that Spider-Man doesn't have to do anything illegal. But where does he think that money is coming from? Spider-Man eventually defeats Digger and turns over evidence that gets the Don arrested, but that doesn't change the fact that he took money from the mob and entered their employ. If Jameson found out, he'd blow a gasket. And frankly, Daredevil would never stoop so low.
And at number 10, organic webs. Tobey Maguire's iteration of Spider-Man was extremely accurate to the comic source material, but one of the few differences between the two was his version of Spider-Man's web shooters. For most of Spider-Man's nearly 60 years of existence in comic books and various adaptations, the superhero used a pair of wrist-mounted shooters that shoot a synthetic web-like fluid. While most Spider-Man adaptations retain the iconic mechanical web shooters, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy opted to give its version of Peter Parker the power to generate webbing from his body. When you really think about it, it is really gross. It was even a joke made in the latest Spider-Man movie when the Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland versions of the characters are flabbergasted and slightly grossed out by Tobey Maguire's organic sticky spider webbing that came propelling out of this weird scar on his wrist. Maybe I'm weird, but I kinda like the organic webbing? I don't know, maybe because I grew up on the Raimi films, it felt right, and the reason for Raimi doing it makes sense to me. I'm sorry.
Number 9, from rags to riches and back to rags again. One of the weirdest things that happened to Peter in regards to no one seemingly really acknowledging or remembering it much in the continuity is when Peter became basically a globe-trotting billionaire all his own, in a similar but distinctly different style to Iron Man's Tony Stark. Well, of course, initially it was Otto in Peter's body who created Parker Industries and made it a success, but still, even without Otto in the driver's seat, it makes sense when you think about it, as Peter is a brilliant man who, if he had the time and he put in the effort, could easily end up near the top of the Fortune 500. However, what is weird is that he created a global company that was extremely profitable and successful for a time, lost it, and then everyone seemingly forgot who he was. He ended up back as just poor Peter Parker, just trying to get by while playing the role of hero. And everyday folks don't seem to even recognize him as the face of a once great global company. That's pretty nuts.
Number 8. Getting beat up by the Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, probably. As the Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on the list of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing, which made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his whole portals. He landed more than a few good punches on the hero as well. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yeah, he said that. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet, and he got his own back eventually, but that's not important.
Number 7. Everyone loves MJ. An awkward moment in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe comes courtesy of Ultimate Peter Parker getting his own version of the Clone Saga. Except here, instead of Ben Reilly and Kane Parker, we got Kane Parker and Jessica Drew. That's right, in the Ultimate universe, Jessica Drew is actually a female clone of Peter Parker. There were some other clones too, just for those of you that are like, you didn't mention all the other clones. But yes, I know about them. They exist. And even more intriguing and also kind of sad in this reality, Jessica and all the other clones have all of Peter's memories, which leads to pretty much all of them having a huge crush on MJ. Jessica included. Although in an even stranger twist, despite also being in love with Mary Jane, or seemingly being in love with Mary Jane, instead of Jessica ending up as a lesbian in this portrayal of her character as a result of sharing Peter's memories and feelings, it is implied that she actually ends up dating Johnny Storm, albeit possibly briefly. Although I think that also could say something about the potential for the close relationship that Johnny and Peter have in the comics, so maybe that's what that's about.
Number 6. Spider-Man and Silk getting busy on the ceiling. Cindy Moon, first revealed in the Amazing Spider-Man number 1 from 2014, was a girl who on the same day was also bitten by the exact same spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. Now fast forward to the 4th issue of that comic and Peter learns of her existence and the place she was being kept safe. He releases her and joins her as she goes off into the world. Now it took about 5 or 6 pages before it was revealed that these two young spider heroes release pheromones that make them irresistibly attracted to one another, and they nearly immediately start going at it. Mid-argument. They go at it so much so that it carries on into the next issue when he and Cindy Moon are on the ceiling of the apartment that Peter shares with his roommate Anna Maria Marconi. So of course Anna Maria walks in on the two spider freaks, sparsely clothed and unable to control themselves. Not an ideal situation.
Number 5. Aunt May forgets to knock. Speaking on people walking in on people. Later on in their comic book history, MJ and Peter wouldn't just be friends or even dating, they would actually end up married for quite a long while. However, just because they were married didn't mean that Aunt May always remembered to respect their privacy and knock when they were alone together in a bedroom. Case in point in Web of Spider-Man issue number 50, when she decides to bring them up some warm hot cocoa to warm their bones on a cold winter's night, only to find out that they are already busy warming their bones.
Number 4. Miles getting Gwen's hair stuck on his hand. If you haven't seen the totally awesome and award-winning animated Into the Spider-Verse film, well, pause this video and go do that and then come back. But if you have, then you surely remember the scene not too long after Miles Morales discovers he has powers and winds up in an extremely embarrassing situation with Gwen Stacy, his crush. You see, Miles' uncle told him to try this totally slick move on his crush where he puts his hand on her shoulder and be like, "Hey." Which, I don't know where you go after you say the "hey" thing. It kind of feels like terrible advice, and I think it was because Miles just did it in the middle of a conversation and made it really bad. But then, Thanks to his new powers, when he goes to remove his hand, he accidentally gets stuck to her hair. The next 30 seconds sees him accidentally pull her in close, get stuck to her textbook, spin around, blame it on puberty, and then get catapulted by her, all in front of other students. She ends up getting half her hair buzzed off, which, hey, it's an experience neither of them will forget. Maybe when they're married they'll laugh about it, I don't know, maybe not.
Number 3, Spider-Man loses control. One of the most awkward moments in terms of just what went down has to be when Spider-Man accidentally hits MJ when she's trying to get between Peter and his clone Ben Reilly to stop them from fighting one another. Oddly enough, I was remembering a thing where this also appeared. Even though this moment was very different in terms of what caused it to happen, a very similar incident also is incorporated into the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film franchise. In this case, MJ tries to stop Peter from beating up on a bouncer at the nightclub that she works at. In the comics, Peter and Ben both go to run some tests to figure out who is the clone and who is the original between them, when Peter learns that Ben is supposedly the original, and he freaks out. He begins wailing on Ben, and Mary Jane breaks free to attempt to break up the fight, calling out to her husband, "Stop it, Peter, for the love of God! Stop, you're killing him!" Instinctively, Peter goes to push MJ back, telling her to get away and leave him alone, and he strikes her, sending her flying with his super strength, only for him to realize what he's done almost immediately, condemning his own behavior before running away. In Spider-Man 3, it goes down similarly, with Peter running away even following this encounter, and MJ calling out, "Peter, stop it," which is also very similar.
Number 2, Spiderweb underwear. In The Amazing Spider-Man from 2014, after Spider-Man had a bit of a body swap with a certain villain, he got into a fight that had all of his costume, minus his mask, zapped off. Like, all of it, down to his birthday suit. As a quick solution to the problem, Spider-Man decided to use his webbing to cover up his privates as an honestly genius decision. Well, it would have been genius, but see, Peter didn't realize that the villain he mind swapped with actually improved his webbing so it now lasts much longer, which meant Peter now had some permanent underwear for a while. So not only did Spider-Man have a costume consisting of a mask and web undies that was seen all over live television, prompting many characters to laugh at him, and even gave Jessica Drew a clue that this was Peter Parker back in his body again, he also had to explain this whole thing in one long monologue to Captain America of all people. Oh, Peter, you never cease to amaze.
Number 1, trapped in Dr. Octopus's mind. At one point in the comics, we get the awesome weirdness that is Superior Spider-Man, which is basically when Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, takes hold of Spider-Man's body. However, this happens as the result of a body swap, which Peter is tricked into, which means that Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, has his consciousness end up in the failing body of Otto Octavius, who at that time was dying. While trapped in Otto's mind, Peter ends up reliving some of Otto's memories, namely an extremely intimate and weirdly romantic moment that happened between Otto and Aunt May when the two were engaged to be married. Although they never ended up married, apparently they still sealed the deal, if you know what I mean. Which means that Peter got a front row seat to an intimate interaction that he'd rather have never known happened. And you know, he's in Otto's body in that memory, so.
Number 10, Peter Parker. Hey, we didn't say which Spider-Man was doing the embarrassing here. Peter Parker and Miles Morales met for the first time when Peter was teleported to Miles' universe. Now, I don't know why Peter's first decision was to attack Mr. Morales. He's had clones of himself before, and he's also been to other alternate universes, but hey, that's what he did. And it was 110% a mistake. As fans of Miles know, he is extremely capable. And he also has a unique Spider-Man power set. He used his Venom sting to paralyze Peter while jumping over him. He then went invisible and got Peter with a sneak attack kick to the face. It doesn't stop there though. After Peter demasked Miles, he got a nice electric shock that knocked him out cold. For an 11-year-old kid, Miles gave the experienced Peter Parker quite the beating. Number 9. Winter Soldier and Falcon. For a young lad, Peter Parker seems to overpower a lot of people. In his introduction to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Peter just shows us, and two of Captain America's best pals, that he ain't someone to mess with. During their fight, he overpowered the super soldier, even using his metal arms against him, disables and webs up Falcon, and redirects a huge chunk of metal flung at him by the Winter Soldier, all while quipping in the best ways possible. It was honestly so awesome to see when it first happened. He leaves them laying on the ground exhausted and webbed up. Not only an embarrassment for the two veteran soldiers and heroes, but a really fitting and hilarious introduction for the character to the MCU. Number 8. Luke Cage. A lot of the time, when a new hero is introduced into a comic book world, a fight between the misunderstood hero and another has to take place. That is exactly what happened when Luke Cage came on the scene. Luke Cage, the hero for hire, showed up in the Amazing Spider-Man number 123, hired by Jonah Jameson to capture Spider-Man for the death of Norman Osborn. Luke Cage ain't a guy you should underestimate by any means. Super strength and stamina, bulletproof skin, and a healing factor. But it's Spider-Man. Luke tackles Spider-Man off a roof and gets a few punches in. But Spider-Man kicked him off of another roof, teased him about basically being a mercenary, slammed him through a brick wall, got several fists to the face in, used Luke's own weight against him, and punched him through a skylight. They come to blows later on in the comic with pretty much the same outcome, causing Luke Cage to quit this one particular job. Go Web! Fly! Up, up, and away, Web! Shazam! Go, Web, go! 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 Go, Web, go! Oh wait, that's not my power. No, my power is to make YouTube videos for you guys. Do you know what gives me this power? You liking and subscribing to the channel. And you are doing an absolutely stunning job. Keep it up. And don't forget to check out our Facebook for more content. Number 7, the Hulk. In terms of raw power, Spider-Man stands absolutely no chance against the Hulk. I think his spider sense may give him some kind of advantage, but there is no way he is lasting long in that fight. Unless he gets a power boost in the form of, I don't know, the power cosmic. Oh, that's exactly what happened in the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 328. The Grey Hulk, who yes is a bit weaker and logical compared to his Savage counterpart, is hired by Sebastian Shaw to target Spider-Man. Money is always a good motivator. Unfortunately for Hulk, Spider-Man has been going to the cosmic gym and hitting the cosmic weights. He lands some pretty heavy blows on the Grey Goliath and even blinds him with a new I-beam power. When some kids are put in danger though, Spider-Man ends the conflict quick by punching the Hulk into orbit and then saving him before he suffocates, standing all confident with his hands on his hips and like that. Number 6, the Fantastic Four. In the very first issue of his self-titled magazine, Spider-Man is putting other heroes to shame. Spider-Man infiltrates the Baxter building, where he is encased in a plexiglass cage that he very easily opens the door to. He takes a single punch from the thing before he throws him into Johnny Storm. When Reed tries to catch Peter, he totally just dodges it and webs up Mr. Fantastic's hands. He uses his spider sense to detect Sue Storm while she's invisible and spins her around really fast with her lasso. But then, Johnny Storm gets him in a circle of flame. He says, and I quote, "Well, I'll just jump over that clown's little trap." It's honestly a pretty impressive display, and it happened in no less than 1.5 pages. The fight ends when Spider-Man lets him know that he's here to join up, and with that little fight was just a display of what he can do. Yeah, that little display would probably do better than a resume. Number 5, Iron Man. In the Civil War storyline, we know that Spider-Man initially is on the side of Tony Stark's Iron Man, but after he sees the lengths that Tony is willing to go to, he has a bit of a change of heart. Obviously, this leads to a scuffle between the two. At this time, Tony had given Peter the Iron Spider suit. What he didn't tell Peter is that he built in an emergency override that would shut down the suit and essentially shut down Peter with the simple phrase Omega Omega Epsilon 9. It's only a bit of a jerk move. You took Peter under your wing, but you're going to plant a failsafe against him? It kinda makes it look like you know you're guilty. But then again, he is a genius, he is a member of the Illuminati, and he is not the kind of guy to take risks. But how is this embarrassing for Tony? Well, I'm glad you asked, my little nerds. Peter is no idiot, and behind Stark's back, he hacked into the suit and built in his own override to override the override that Tony put there. Passcode, surprise. And the suit is back up and running and covers Tony's helmet in a thick layer of web, allowing Peter to get in a good punch and escape. Number 4. Wolverine. This one's a pretty quick one. I bet some of you thought I was going to pull from the Wolverine vs. Spider-Man comic. I'll do you one better. It should be obvious, but you don't dare insult Mary Jane Watson to Peter's face. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 522, Peter is awoken with a call about a newspaper article claiming Mary Jane has a little entanglement with Tony Stark. It's obviously not true and actually a setup by a villain. But that's not the point right now. Peter got out of his bed in Stark Tower and goes looking for his wife. Along the way, he runs into Wolverine in a room with a very lovely high-up view of the city. Now, Logan decides to start going on about how Mary Jane messed up big time, and after a warning from Peter, he decides to comment on her lack of brains. This lovely little comment gets him thrown through an unbreakable glass window, and it gives him a really colorful way to catch a cab. Number 3. Daredevil. When Spider-Man was in possession of the symbiote suit, he wasn't his normal self. He was much more ruthless. And Spider-Man can already knock criminals into a coma when he is pulling his punches. When Spider-Man interrupts Sin Eater Stanley Carter from attacking Betty Brant and almost killing her, he starts to lay into the guy, beating Stanley while giving him an earful. Peter goes so far that Daredevil notices his heartbeat pounding and pulls him off of the beaten villain. He defends the criminal from Peter, who is seemingly gonna kill him. If you want him, you'll have to come through me. Probably not the best choice of words there, Daredevil. The very next panel shows Daredevil flying through a window. If it wasn't such a serious moment, I would laugh. Nah, I did laugh. Is that wrong? I can't help it, I'm sorry. Number 2. The X-Men. It seems that Spider-Man really shows his skill when he comes into contact with teams of heroes. First the Fantastic Four, and in the 4th issue of Secret Wars, the X-Men. As if dealing with multiple superpowered beings was his speciality or something. I think the best part about these altercations is the way he just keeps talking while he's embarrassing them. After Xavier senses Spider-Man listening in on their conversation, Spider-Man attacks the X-Men a little prematurely, I'll admit. He dodges Wolverine, webs Colossus's face, dangles Rogue from a rod, webs up Nightcrawler faster than he can say BAMF, and swats Wolverine away with a single swing and escapes. It's just so crazy to me how he knows that he easily outclasses almost every one of the X-Men. Or if not, he knows exactly how to subdue them. Number 1. Superboy. If we're doing a video about characters embarrassing other heroes, there's almost always going to be one point that has to do with the DC and Marvel crossover event. Just like the first point, this isn't actually Peter Parker though, but it's a clone of him, so that's basically the same thing. When the DC Marvel crossover happened, Ben Reilly had taken up the Spider-Man mantle. And it was him that fought Superboy on a rooftop. To get things going, Spider-Man hits the Superboy with a webbing right to his very stylish sunglasses. Superboy, just trying to get a hit on our spider friend, busts a hole into a water tower, drenching the entire battlefield. Spider-Man wouldn't stand too long in a one-on-one slugging match with this guy, but that's not his specialty anyways. Just as Superboy is about to land a flying blow into Spidey, he jumps out of the way, firing webbing all over the guy and leaving the soaking wet Superboy to fly straight into an electrical box, taking him right out of the fight.